Hello and welcome back to London Cycle Routes. Today I'll be showing you how to cycle from Greenwich in southeast London to Westminster in central London. This ride takes about 35 minutes and you can do the whole thing on quiet streets and protected cycle lanes. By public transport, the same journey takes more like 40 minutes and requires a change of line. So cycling is a great option for this popular commuter route, especially since the opening of a new cycleway on the main road, which makes it more direct than ever. If you find this video useful or you just enjoy watching it, then please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, as I try to post new videos just like it every week. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to everyone who supports the channel on Patreon. If you'd like to contribute too, then you can find a link in the description below the video. Alright, let's get going. So we're starting by the Cutty Sark and you can see the entrance to the Greenwich Foot Tunnel on your right and the towers of Canary Wharf over the river. There's a very short section along the Thames path here, which has a nice separated cycle pathway away from pedestrians. In this video, we're mostly going to be using the newly completed Cycleway 4, which is a fantastic segregated route along the main road towards London Bridge. I've done a video of that route before in the opposite direction, but a few people asked me how I would connect it to get into Westminster, which is obviously a popular commuting location. There are a few different ways of doing that, as you do get quite a few options as you get towards central London. But I think the route in this video is both the most direct and the most pleasant one. We're now on Cycleway 4 and the first half of this route is mostly like what you're seeing now. That is a two-way segregated track along the main road. Cycleway 4 currently stretches between roughly Tower Bridge and Greenwich, where we just joined it, with a further section from Greenwich to Charlton. But there are plenty of safe and pleasant routes which connect to it, so you can get a lot further in the west, in the east, and to the north, and even the south actually. I'll be doing plenty more videos like this one showing you how to make the most of this brilliant new route, so do hit subscribe if you want to see those. Cycleway 4 in general is incredibly easy to use, and I'd be perfectly comfortable cycling along here with kids. In fact, I've done it with my son on my back and felt completely safe the whole time. You really just need to follow the protected lane for its entire length. The second half of the video leaves Cycleway 4 and we take a quiet backstreet route through Southwark, Waterloo and over Westminster Bridge into Parliament Square. Unlike some routes on quiet streets, this one will be really direct though. In fact, if you looked at the map at the beginning, it's probably even more direct than following the main roads. It actually cuts a corner, so stay tuned to see which way I go. As you can see from the progress we're making, Cycleway 4 is an incredibly easy ride. Previously I would have got into the centre of town from Greenwich by following Cycleway 10, which used to be known as Quiet Way 1. It's a backstreet route that goes around the back of Millwall Stadium. C10 is still there as an option and some people might prefer it, but personally I would probably use Cycleway 4 for this particular route over C10. C10 is still useful though, and for some destinations I think it still makes sense. For example, if you're coming from New Cross, then C10 is probably a little bit more direct, as you don't have to go as far north to join the route. And also some people might just prefer riding on back streets, so it is a matter of preference. Maybe you don't like going along the main road, maybe you like to take it easy through a residential street or something like that. If so, then maybe C10 is for you. I think for the vast majority of people though, especially making the trip from Greenwich, this is the right option. I talked a lot about the design of C4 in my previous video from London Bridge to Greenwich, but one thing I didn't really touch on was the drawbacks of the two-way cycle track design. Overall, I think the design is great, but one thing to be aware of is how the cycle track deals with side roads. There are really two types of side roads along C4, or really any cycle track like this. There'll be unsignalled side roads and signalled side roads. There's an unsignalled side road coming up just here, and you can immediately see the problem. That driver didn't check for cyclists coming in both directions and just immediately pulled out in front of me. That's because motorists generally aren't expecting bikes to be coming in both directions if they're not familiar with the layout of the cycle lane, especially when it's new like this one. I don't think that this is a huge problem, and it's certainly not a reason to avoid using the route, but you'll be safer if you're aware of it and just treat side roads like that with caution, especially when it's not clear whether a driver has seen you. For signalled side roads, that is ones with traffic lights, it's just really important that you don't run any red lights on here, as those side roads will be signalled for a reason, and you should wait until it's safe. Now, this junction outside Surrey Quay Station is probably the biggest weak point on the whole route. As you can see, a car was stopped on the crossing blocking our way there, and having ridden this route a few times now, I can confidently say that that is a pretty regular occurrence. Because the lights outside the station there are a bit of a pinch point, motorists tend to get as far forward as they can in the hope that they get through the lights. As a result, they don't really think twice about blocking your crossing to save themselves a few seconds. That is, if they even noticed that there was a crossing there in the first place. One thing that a couple of people suggested in the comments to my previous video about this cycleway, which I completely agree with, is that a yellow box junction should be introduced there. Drivers tend to stay clear of those as they are camera enforced and they get fined if they park on the yellow hatching. Generally though, this is a fantastic cycleway, and if you look on the left there, you can see the sorts of trips it enables. I think that was 2 kids getting around by themselves on a scooter. I don't know where they're going, but that's exactly the sort of journey that could, in other circumstances, be done by a parent ferrying them by car. But with a protected lane like this, it gives them the independence to get around by themselves, and also reduces the need for an unnecessary car journey. And the more journeys like that we can switch to sustainable modes like this, the better. Just coming up on our left here is Bermondsey Tube Station, which should help you orientate yourself if you're more familiar by getting around by tube and bus. One interesting thing about this, you can see it's quite a short, squat station, which might seem like a strange choice, but it was actually designed that way so that an office block or apartment block could be built on top of the station in a second phase of construction. Despite it opening 25 years ago, now that still hasn't happened yet, so the building remains short and squat. It's interesting because it is actually a tradition of London Underground stations to leave room for oversight development on them, and also equally apparently a tradition for that oversight development to not necessarily happen. You can see it in some of those glazed tile Leslie Green stations from the early 20th century, like Maida Vale and Lambeth North, both of which are going on about 100 years old, so I wouldn't hold your breath for oversight development on this one anytime soon. Now, we're going to be leaving Cycleway 4 in a second, and the way that we do that is to turn off left here down Tanner Street. For the next section of our route, we'll be picking our way through the back streets, and we'll be doing it on Cycleway 14, which is a decent signposted backstreet route. You can see coming up here, there's a little bit of wayfinding for you to follow. There's C14 written on the ground, and there are also green and blue signs pointing you in the right direction affixed to lampposts. I know that some people like to get into Westminster by crossing London Bridge and then using Cycleway 3 along the embankment. I had at least one person in the comments saying that that was how they did it. Personally, I don't think that's a good option, mainly because of the one critical fail point on that route, which is the southern junction at the end of London Bridge, which is pretty hairy and not something that I would necessarily direct everybody through. I think most people would probably be able to do it, but this is a much more comfortable route. Cycleway 14 is generally pretty low traffic the whole way through, and I've never really run into any problems along here. It's also got some quite nice additions to it. It's not just simply on back streets, but there's the odd little protected lane and safe crossing at key points where it might otherwise have been suboptimal. A lot of care has clearly been put into its design, and that's not always the case for backstreet routes. Sometimes backstreet routes are used as an excuse not to do anything, so fair play to the designers of this one. I think it really does work as a good cycle route. While there are some through routes remaining for motor traffic through parts of this route, a lot of it is also filtered. One example here is on Newcomen Street, where the end of this street has actually been closed with bollards and only cycles can use it to cross Borough High Street here. That means that that entire section is really quiet, and you end up with a similar effect in other parts of the route as well. Where that isn't the case, sometimes they will provide a protected lane, often in one direction only on the contraflow, but it just makes it all quite a comfortable ride. You can see here that we're on a stepped cycle track separated by a curb, and then we go into a shared space area with pedestrians. Obviously, you should be careful here, not ride too quickly, and give everybody plenty of space. There's another modal filter here as well on Union Street, which just makes the whole thing nice and quiet. The wayfinding on this route is pretty good, and I think it's generally pretty easy to stick to it just by following the cycle symbols and the signs, but if you do need a little bit of extra help, you can always download the map of the route, which I'll link to in the description of the video. That is a GPX format file, and you can use it on whatever app or device that you choose. It is a standard format, which should work on most devices and apps. One small change I would make here is to change that single yellow line on the left to a double yellow line, as when you get cars parked there, they basically take up the whole lane. We're also right next to TfL's headquarters, which is on the right hand side, so I feel like they could probably give that particular street just a little bit more attention than it's currently got. As you cycle on the cut, if you're not in a hurry, maybe consider stopping for a bite to eat or a coffee at any of the many places along here. This street was closed to through traffic a couple of years ago by Lambeth Council, and it's really transformed the area to somewhere that you might actually want to spend some time outside. It used to be quite a busy road, but no longer. There's also more filters going in soon, which should cut off some of the remaining routes around the area and turn it into a true low traffic neighbourhood. Now, we want to turn right down Lower Marsh here, and the way that I do that is I make sure that I'm looking over my shoulder like this guy, make sure there's no cars trying to overtake you, and use the crossing. If you are being overtaken, then just pull up onto the pavement on the left and use the cycle crossing when it's a bit clearer, as cars won't be expecting you to veer right. By the way, if you didn't stop at the cut for a bite to eat or a coffee, then you should probably stop on Lower Marsh here, which is an equally lovely street. I actually really like Lower Marsh, and it's probably one of my favourite places in London. I particularly like Café Del Marsh for a drink. You can either sit outside and watch the street go by, or they've got a massive beer garden in the back as well. You're also really close to Waterloo station, so if you've got some time to kill when you're waiting for a train or you want to meet near the station, it's a good place to go. Now, I would go right here, but if you see there's a red and white barrier there, which is quite annoying to cycle through, so I'm just going to pop onto Royal Street here and join Lambeth Palace Road this way. There are protected cycle lanes along here, and you can either do what I've done if the traffic is light, as it is today, or if it's heavier, then you can use the Toucan crossing, which is just to the left of the junction that we joined Lambeth Palace Road on. Now, if you're a little bit braver, you can cut that little corner we did, and as you're coming out of Lower Marsh, you can simply turn right. Instead of going into Upper Marsh, you can continue on Westminster Bridge Road and join these lanes directly. Some people might be more comfortable doing that. It'll save you like 20 seconds, or you could just go the long way around like I did. I don't think it really matters which way you go. We're just crossing Westminster Bridge and we're nearly there, but I should issue my customary warning about Westminster Bridge. These cycle lanes are quite poorly designed, and often because the pavements are too narrow for the number of pedestrians who want to see Big Ben, you will see people spilling out of them, especially on the other side where people stand in the cycle lane to take photos of the clock. So just be super careful as you go down there, because people can veer into or step into the cycle lane at any moment, especially if you're going in the opposite direction. Some people actually choose to use the bus lane instead of the cycle lane there. The problem with that is that sometimes there are pedicabs parked in the bus lane, so really both options do have downsides. I will leave it to you to choose which one you go on. But now we have made it and we're in Parliament Square. As you can see from that map, that is an incredibly direct route, and it's probably quicker than getting public transport as well, I think. I think one really notable thing as well is that the backstreet section, which is to the west of Tower Bridge Road, when we were on Cycleway 14, Lower Marsh, etc., is just as direct, if not more direct, than the main road section. And if you look at the routes of the main roads that you'd have to follow if you weren't taking that backstreet route in the dark yellow, you can see that it's certainly more direct than taking those. It's much less of a detour to get to Westminster, so it does prove that backstreet routes aren't always necessarily less direct. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments what you think of that, and if you agree with some of the choices that I made there about how to get into Westminster. Maybe some people might go over Blackfriars Bridge, take Cycleway 3. It's a slightly longer way to do it, but maybe more comfortable if you're more comfortable with cycle lanes. Personally, this is how I would do it. Make sure you hit the subscribe button if you're not subscribed already. If you're feeling generous, do leave me a like, as it does boost the video and helps other people find it. And if you're feeling really generous, then you can join those fantastic people on the Patreon who help keep the channel going. Thanks so much to all of you, and I will see you again next time.